St. Louis University law professor. Good morning, Greg Willard.
Good morning, McGraw and Jennifer.
Have you ever run across Brett Kavanaugh in your dealings?
I have not. Yeah. I'm good friends with one of his former Justice Kennedy clerks, but I have not run across Justice Kavanaugh.
Yes, he is now officially on the Supreme Court.
He is.
He can now rule. He's now a full-fledged member. Is there the court already started, so does he have to play catch-up, or does he have to sit out one or two cases?
He probably will not participate in the 5 or 6 cases that were argued last week at oral argument.
Okay.
Oral argument resumes tomorrow, and he will take his place on the far right-hand side of the bench, which is where the junior justice sits.
Is that ironic in any way, shape, or form that it's the far right side of the bench?
I was wondering if you'd pick up on that quip.
What's going on in law circles? What's the thought? What's the philosophy? Has lasting damage been done to your famed Supreme Court?
I think historically, lasting damage would have been done. And I on the air, I said several times, I fear that lasting damage is being done, and I have begun to rethink that, McGraw. And I say that in that I think we're in an era of fleeting indignation.
Snowflakes.
We all can remember the Access Hollywood tape in the 2016 presidential election.
Right.
And the next morning, the hue and cry was, well, that's it. Hillary needs to shine her shoes for the inauguration. Well, 10 days later, the polls have completely shifted. And I think that the chaos and clatter of the last 3 weeks, I would bet, McGraw and Jennifer, if we're sitting here in another 3 weeks, we'll say, wow, that really seems a long time ago. So long-winded answer to your short-winded question. The short-winded answer is, I think the lasting impact on the court will probably be not significant.
What about the confirmation process?
The confirmation process is broken, to put it mildly. It is a mess, and I'm not certain how we fix it. I think we have reached a point, McGraw and Jennifer, that we need to find some way that the United States Senate can save itself from the senators. Now, whether that is a rule or some other procedure, but we simply can't go on like this. We can't have a situation where an anonymous allegation is made to one senator, and 2.5 months later, it is suddenly this aha moment, and it's leaked to the press, and then the Senate seizes up, and we have this cacophony that goes on.
But Anita Hill called for change 27 years ago in the process.
But hold on a second. I don't see going forward how one party's president is ever going to get a nomination through if another party has control of the Senate.
Oh, I think that's probably where we're headed, and I think a lot of people suspect that if the Democrats take control of the Senate next month, if there are any vacancies between now and January 20th of 2021, I guess, they won't get filled.
Right.
And I think you can point to a lot of reasons, McGraw and Jennifer, but I think at the top of that list has to be the elimination of the filibuster. That when Harry Reid exercised the nuclear option as to Circuit Court of Appeals and District Court judges, and then McConnell and the Republicans exercised the nuclear option and eliminated filibusters as to Supreme Court, I think it was simply inevitable that we'd have this mess.
Right, but this goes back. The reason why Harry Reid took it off was because they weren't giving Obama's judges any floor votes or any passes, because they weren't giving Bush's judges any passes, because they weren't giving Clinton's judges any passes, because they weren't giving Bush's judges any passes.
Well, they were slow walking.
Right.
They were getting confirmed, but they were being slow walked. I think the other moment that we all need to take a step back is sort of back to 8th grade civics class And that is, we live in a democracy with majority rules. Well, there's a corresponding piece to that, and that is there is a minority who lost, who doesn't rule. How far are we willing to allow the minority to go when it doesn't get its way? And I think what we witnessed the last 3 weeks is right on the edge of what we as a democracy ought to accept.
So back to your question of snowflakes. And I thought about this over the weekend because the outrage of the liberals, and I don't mean that as a negative, over the I can't believe they wouldn't let a woman's voice be heard. It's not, they didn't confirm Brett Kavanaugh because he's a man, and they didn't believe Brett Kavanaugh over him because he's conservative. If Brett Kavanaugh were a female judge, conservatives would have believed the female judge over the male accuser.
Well, I think we had an abject lesson in why pronouncement of absolutes in anything, whether it's medicine, law, or certainly politics, the pronouncement of absolutes is not necessarily the way to go. And here's a perfect example. When Dr. Ford's allegations went public, there was an immediate pronouncement of an absolute. The women must be believed. Senator Hirono, the men should just shut up.
All right.
Well, then Ms. Ramirez allegations. The women must be believed. And that was the absolute. And then Ms. Swetnick's gang rape allegations came forward. And suddenly even the opponents of Justice Kavanaugh said, oh my goodness, wait a second. Well, but at that point it was too late for them because they had already pronounced the absolute. The women accusers must be believed. And so I think we as a society and we as the electing body for the government, we need to think about how do we handle allegations of sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And there has to be a better way, but all I'm saying is to pronounce absolutes that thou shalt believe X or thou shalt not believe Y is not a good way to go. The other, I guess, there aren't many bright moments, but what we have seen and is totally lacking in this and other contexts is grace.
Oh, well.
Where is there an element of grace?
Grace left this conversation a long time ago.
So, and you and I talked about it on the air a couple weeks ago, McGraw, with young 10-year-old Liza Kavanaugh, who said to her mothers as they began their evening prayers, we should pray for that woman. And I guess what really, I'll take off my hopefully objective hat and put on my editorial hat. The angriest I got through this whole episode, McGraw and Jennifer, was Saturday afternoon.
This Saturday afternoon when they got ready to take the vote and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer made their final speeches. And if ever there was a moment for those two men to exercise some grace, they having spoken dozens of times with vitriol and passion, if ever there was a moment for grace, that was it. And what did we get? More of the same vitriol and venom on the one side and chest pounding that we won on the other. And I can't tell you how angry that made me. Well, Jeff Flake, I think, said it best on 60 Minutes. You don't get any credit for being bipartisan. You don't get rewarded for being bipartisan. So is it their fault or is it our fault? Because they're just a mirror onto the electorate.
And speaking of children, how do we teach civics classes now?
Well, it's whether it's civics classes, Jennifer, or my law students, but I think part of it is, and in the category of civics lessons, we have now 4 Supreme Court justices who were appointed by presidents who did not receive a majority or plurality of the vote.
Right.
We have a justice who Saturday was confirmed by senators who represent 18% of the population. And as I remind my law students, and you and I, Jennifer, could remind a grade school civics class, we like to say we are the great democracy. Tell that to Hillary Clinton and Al Gore as to how purely democratic we are. I think the ancient Greeks would perhaps see us a little differently. My point being that as you say, McGraw, there's no, and Senator Flake said, there's no reason to go to the middle to govern in a bipartisan fashion. Well, part of that is because we are elected by the fringes. We, the leaders, are elected by the fringes, so there's no incentive to govern from the middle.
What happens in the next couple of weeks if Judge Kavanaugh rules that Wilbur Ross doesn't have to testify or turn over anything, or the White House doesn't have to turn over anything, or that Donald Trump doesn't have to testify in a criminal case, or what happens when he votes with the president on any one of these huge issues that might be coming down the pike?
Oh, I think I would suggest three separate reactions. Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell will get up on their desks at MSNBC and clatter that he's a partisan hack, and this is a perfect example. Sean Hannity will get up on his desk and say, see, this is why we need justices who will apply the law. And the three of us and others will say, he did what he took an oath to do, apply the law and the Constitution as it is written, as it has been interpreted. And I guess as a practical piece to that, McGraw, Chief Justice John Roberts is as protective of the institution of the United States Supreme Court as any Chief Justice who ever sat in that chair. And I think we can safely assume that when issues like that, like the Wilbur Ross deposition or the Emoluments Clause litigation with President Trump, as if and when those get to the court, Brett Kavanaugh will not be assigned to write the opinion by Chief Justice Roberts. That another justice will be assigned to write that opinion. Justice Kavanaugh may cast his vote with the majority, but I think we can rest assured that Chief Justice Roberts, in protecting the institution of the Supreme Court, he will have someone else write that opinion.
Leave you with this little history lesson, which you know all too well, and people keep going back to Clarence Thomas. As contentious as Clarence Thomas was, he got 52 votes for confirmation, but he got 60 votes for cloture. So Democrats had to vote to get it out of committee, right, to sort of end debate with 60 votes. 52 ultimately voted for him, but there were Democrats who voted to end the conversation and move it to a vote.
Yeah, indirectly, because no one invoked filibuster, and I think what we're at a point in time, McGraw and Jennifer, where we need senators like Evan Bayh and Jack Danforth and Nancy Kassebaum and Sam Nunn, David Boren, to come together to formulate some system of rules to save the United States Senate from the senators, because...
Well, they had that rule. They had the 60 rule.
Well, they did, but then they exercised the nuclear option.
Right.
So they need to come up with a rule that is, may I use the term, nuclear option proof. But they've got to save the United States Senate from the senators, because if we can conclude nothing else on a Monday morning after these last 3 weeks, it is that these men and women in the United States Senate are not capable of solving the problem themselves.
But they politicized the courts originally, Rich, which was not supposed to be politicized. And both sides are equally as guilty, which led us to this basically. And I think we're headed for, unless the party in power in the presidency has the majority in the Senate, we're not going to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed.
I think, given the present makeup, I think that is highly likely, McGraw. The idea that if Chuck Schumer is in the majority, that he is going to allow Donald Trump to put a third justice, we can wait till the sun rises in the west.
Right. That's never going to happen.
Right.
That is never going to happen. And if pick somebody. If Joe Biden becomes president, you can tell me Mitch McConnell is going to allow somebody in.
And there's one last point I'd like to make, and that is that almost the entirety of this discussion the last few weeks has been on Justice Kavanaugh's philosophy. And that, the opponents are saying he's this right-wing ideologue, and that's why we've got to keep them off the court. McGraw, I think there's something, and Jennifer, there's something more at work here. And that is, Justice Kavanaugh's philosophy is perhaps more conservative than some would like. But I think what the opponents really feared is his intellectual power. And by that I mean you can go back in the history of the Supreme Court. Justice Scalia is a perfect example. Justice Jackson, Chief Justice Marshall, Oliver Wendell Holmes. In that, sure, they had 1/9 of the vote, but they had an intellectual power and a writing power that changed the way that the American people and the courts think about things. Scalia did it, and I think the opponents of Justice Kavanaugh are grievously worried that he has that intellectual power to change the direction of much of the law for decades to come.
I think we can all agree that we believe the woman's allegations when it's against the person of our party.
Or I think we can use the technical term our party, but we are at a point in the history of this country, we don't have political parties, we have political tribes.
Greg Willard is the best. That is 2 more law credits towards your law degree at St. Louis University Law School. Greg Willard, good stuff. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to meet you, Greg.
Great to be with you, McGraw and Jennifer.